Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale is a journey of unexpected reunions, emotional discoveries, and profound moments that change lives forever. Today's story is about Sarah, a hardworking single mother who is caught between the responsibilities of her daily life and the unexpected return of a childhood friend, Jack. As they reconnect, old memories resurface, and new challenges emerge, forcing them to confront their past and reimagine their futures. What happens when life gives you a second chance? Join us as we dive into this heartwarming and life-changing story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story. The morning rush at the coffee shop was relentless. In the heart of downtown Boston, the early crowd buzzed with energy as people hurried to work, chatted with friends, or simply awaited their caffeine fix. The barista called out the next customer, but Sarah Thompson barely heard the words. She was lost in her own world, the worn leather of her wallet pressing against her trembling hands. Her fingers moved slowly, methodically, as she counted the change for the third time. The coins clinked in the palm of her hand, a familiar sound that seemed to ground her, if only for a moment. Sarah had been here before. She knew the drill. Every day was the same. A few quarters, a couple of dimes, a nickel. She added them up again. $2.75. Just enough for a small coffee. Nothing more. The warmth of it would help her through another grueling day, or at least give her the energy to face what was ahead. Her eyes, heavy from sleepless nights, barely noticed the faces around her. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of her exhaustion. Hours spent sewing custom dresses for clients. Hours spent alone. Hours spent building something small and fragile that was both her livelihood and her heart. At 28, Sarah was carrying the weight of single motherhood, a burden that often felt heavier than she could bear. But she carried it with quiet determination, a stoic resolve that came from necessity. She had learned long ago that the world didn't pause for pity. There was no room for self-doubt, no space for vulnerability. She had a daughter to care for, a business to keep afloat, and dreams that felt increasingly distant with every passing day. After dropping Lily off at daycare that morning, Sarah felt the familiar knot of worry settle in her stomach. It was a constant companion, always there, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Was Lily eating enough? Was she adjusting well to the new daycare? And as always, there was the uncertainty of Sarah's own future. Would her business survive another year? Or would she be forced to abandon it? These were the questions that haunted her, the ones that kept her awake at night. Next customer, please. The barista's voice cut through Sarah's thoughts, pulling her back into the present. She stepped forward, her fingers still pressing the coins into her palm, taking comfort in their weight. The man behind her in line caught her attention. She didn't know why, but something about him stood out. Perhaps it was the impeccably tailored charcoal suit he wore, or the quiet confidence that radiated from him even as he typed on his phone. Seemingly unaware of her presence, she couldn't help but notice the way he glanced at her every now and then, his brown eyes catching hers for a split second. It was subtle, unspoken, but it made Sarah's heart skip a beat, as if he could see something in her, something hidden beneath the exhaustion and the weary smile she wore each day. Just a small coffee, please, Sarah said softly, already placing the coins on the counter. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she realized how long she had taken to count the exact change. It was something she often did, a small act of control in a world that often felt out of her hands. The man stepped forward then, his presence both commanding and gentle. Add a breakfast sandwich to the lady's order, he said to the barista, before turning his attention to Sarah. And I'll have a large Americano. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, he had already handed his credit card to the barista. Oh no, please, you don't have to, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled then, a warm, easy smile that seemed to light up the room. There was something familiar about it, something that made Sarah's heart flutter, though she couldn't place why. I insist, he said, his voice smooth, yet firm. Everyone deserves a proper breakfast. As they waited for their orders, the man turned to her with an intensity that made Sarah's heart race. He studied her face for a moment, his gaze searching, as though he was trying to place her, trying to find the connection that had pulled him toward her. You know, he said slowly, his voice filled with curiosity. This might sound strange, but you look incredibly familiar. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, clutching her wallet. Was it just her exhaustion? Or was there something more to this encounter? I'm Sarah Thompson, she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. Thank you, really, but you didn't have to. The man's eyes widened slightly, as if her name had triggered something deep inside him. Thompson, he repeated, his brow furrowing for a moment. Did you used to live on Maple Lane? House number 247? Sarah froze. The words felt like a sudden rush of air to her lungs. As if a door she had long closed was suddenly thrown wide open. Maple Lane. The memories came flooding back. A little boy next door, with scraped knees and a missing front tooth. They had spent countless summers together, playing in the backyard, chasing butterflies, sharing popsicles on hot afternoons. Danny, she thought, little Danny Carter from next door. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up at him, the years falling away as she saw the same familiar smile, though now it was worn with the wisdom of adulthood. Danny, she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. He grinned then, his face lighting up with recognition. The very same, he said, his tone playful, though I hope I've grown up a bit since then. It had been 23 years since the Carters had moved away, leaving her 5-year-old self devastated at losing her best friend. Now, here he was, transformed from the scrappy kid who had once shared her treehouse into a man who seemed to embody everything Sarah had once dreamed of. And yet, as she looked at him, she couldn't shake the feeling that despite all the years, all the changes, they were still the same two kids who had once shared secrets in the quiet shade of an old oak tree. As Sarah and Jack sat at the small table by the window, the coffee shop buzzed around them. But for the first time that morning, Sarah didn't hear the clinking of cups or the chatter of other customers. Her mind was still reeling, caught in the rush of emotions triggered by Jack's sudden appearance in her life after so many years. The memories of their childhood, of popsicles and treehouses, of secret maps and shared adventures, felt as if they were happening just yesterday. Jack's presence was comforting, yet unsettling. His words were warm and filled with genuine curiosity, but the intensity of his gaze, the way his eyes lingered on her, made Sarah feel exposed. She hadn't planned for any of this. A simple coffee had turned into something unexpected, and with each passing moment, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into this strange reunion. She wanted to pull away, to guard her heart, but something in Jack's eyes made her hesitate. She found herself opening up to him, talking about the years she had spent building her life. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the painful details of her failed marriage. How Lily's father had walked away, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a broken family. How she had fought to keep her alteration business alive, working tirelessly with little reward. But the dream was still there, buried beneath the exhaustion. That dream of someday launching her own clothing line. A dream she wasn't ready to let go of, even if it felt like a distant fantasy. Jack listened intently, his focus unwavering. His coffee had long gone cold, but he didn't seem to mind. As Sarah spoke, she noticed a flicker of empathy in his eyes, something that felt so genuine that it made her heart ache. He didn't offer solutions or pity, but simply listened, as though he understood what it was like to struggle in silence. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he told Sarah his own story. He talked about his tech company, how he had built it from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into something that had recently been sold to a major corporation. The success had been overwhelming, but it had come at a price. A difficult divorce had followed, one that still cast a shadow over his life. Yet, despite his financial success, Jack spoke with an honesty that made Sarah believe he was still the same boy who had shared a treehouse with her so many years ago. As they shared their stories, a sudden buzzing noise interrupted the moment. Jack's phone lit up, the screen flashing with a series of messages. His expression shifted, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a flicker of concern. He glanced at the screen, his hand tightening around the phone as if he were deliberating whether or not to answer. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. Jack paused, letting out a sigh before he answered. "It's just my ex-wife," he said, His voice strained. She's having trouble accepting the terms of our divorce. It's complicated. Sarah nodded, trying to understand, though she could sense there was more to the story than he was willing to share. She had been there herself, stuck in the aftermath of a broken relationship. Struggling to move on, she didn't ask for more details. Sometimes, words weren't enough to explain the weight of emotional pain. Then, as if on impulse, Jack looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. I know this might sound forward, he said carefully, but would you consider having dinner with me tonight? For old time's sake? Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. There it was, the question that had been hanging in the air between them ever since they had first reconnected. She had already been battling with her emotions, caught between the pull of nostalgia and the reality of her own life. She was a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, with little time for anything other than survival. Her world was a far cry from the world Jack inhabited. The differences between them felt vast, insurmountable. She had clients waiting for her at her alterations shop, deadlines to meet, and Lily to care for. She didn't have room for a complicated relationship. And yet, there was something about Jack's presence that made everything feel possible. It was as though he had unlocked a door to a life she had long since closed off. The memories of their childhood, the unspoken bond that had never really faded, had resurfaced in a way that made Sarah feel like she was falling, slowly but surely, back into something familiar. Before she could respond, the coffee shop door slammed open, and the sudden change in atmosphere made her jump. The woman who entered was striking, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding a presence that commanded attention. Sarah's stomach twisted with unease as the woman stormed toward their table, her eyes blazing with anger. So, this is why you're not answering my calls, Jack? The woman spat, her voice cutting through the air. You've got time to play with your little childhood friend, but not with your ex-wife? The words hit Sarah like a slap. She could feel the tension building in the air, the eyes of the other customers in the coffee shop slowly turning toward them. Jack stood quickly, his face hardening as he faced the woman. Victoria, he said, his voice calm but firm. This is completely inappropriate. We're divorced. You can't keep doing this. Victoria laughed bitterly, her gaze flicking over Sarah with undisguised contempt. Divorced? The ink isn't even dry on the papers. And you're already slumming it with her? She sneered at Sarah. How pathetic. Jack's expression darkened. That's enough. Victoria, please leave, or I'll have security escort you out. As the confrontation unfolded, Sarah felt a rush of discomfort, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She stood up, gathering her things, her hands shaking. This wasn't the way she had imagined this morning unfolding. I should go, she whispered, barely able to make eye contact with Jack. Thank you for the coffee, and everything. But before she could leave, Jack called out her name, his voice filled with something that sounded like regret, or perhaps a plea. She couldn't bring herself to turn back. As she hurried toward the door, she felt a mixture of emotions, confusion, fear, and something else that she couldn't quite name. As Sarah stepped outside the coffee shop, the sharp morning air hit her face, but it did little to steady her racing thoughts. The moment she had just left behind, the uncomfortable confrontation with Jack's ex-wife, Victoria, the emotions swirling between them, and the undeniable tension that had filled the room, was still fresh in her mind. Her heart hammered in her chest as she walked down the busy street, trying to push away the questions that were now crowding her thoughts. Why had she agreed to meet him? Why had she even let herself get drawn back into this? She had been running on autopilot for so long, taking care of Lily, working endless hours to keep her small business afloat, holding her breath as she balanced everything, never allowing herself the luxury of thinking about something so complicated as love. And now, Jack had thrown everything off balance. Seeing him again, hearing the warmth in his voice, seeing the same spark in his eyes that had once made her heart race as a little girl, it was all too much. But before she could slip deeper into her thoughts, she heard rapid footsteps behind her. She turned just as Jack appeared, breathless, his brow furrowed in concern. Emma, wait, he called out, his voice full of urgency. Please don't let Victoria ruin this. At least let me explain. he continued, stepping closer, his hand reaching out as if trying to bridge the gap between them. For a moment, Sarah froze. Her hand instinctively went to her wallet, still feeling the weight of the coins she had counted so carefully earlier. And she hesitated. Was this truly the right thing to do? Could she really let herself get swept back into something she wasn't sure she was ready for? But Jack's expression, his eyes filled with concern, a genuine softness that she hadn't seen in years, stopped her from walking away. There was something about him now. Something that made her feel like perhaps this moment wasn't just a random occurrence. Maybe, just maybe, they were meant to cross paths again. I'm sorry, I don't know. Sarah murmured, the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. She had always been practical, careful about the choices she made. But something about Jack, about their shared history, made her want to believe in something different. Something more than what she had settled for. Jack didn't wait for her answer. Instead, gesturing toward a small park across the street. Can we talk somewhere quieter? He asked. I owe you an explanation. And there's so much I want to ask you. They crossed the street together, the crisp autumn air swirling around them as they found a bench in the park. Away from the noise of the city. It was a moment of calm in an otherwise chaotic day. And for the first time, Sarah felt a sense of peace. Maybe it was the setting, the quiet park, the soft rustle of leaves around them, or maybe it was Jack's presence. A calming force in a life that had been full of nothing but chaos for so long. As they sat down, Jack turned to her, his expression more serious now. Victoria, he started, his voice softer. She's not just angry about the divorce. She's desperate. She knows I found out about the embezzlement. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard Jack mention anything like that before. Embezzlement? She asked, her voice quiet with shock. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening as he continued. My company was her cash cow. But when I found out she was stealing from me, I couldn't turn a blind eye. That's why everything blew up. And that's why she's been causing so much trouble. The revelation hit Sarah like a wave. She had always known that Jack's life was more complicated than it seemed. But this was something entirely different. She couldn't even begin to process all of it, the secrets, the betrayal, the years of conflict that had come between them. But before she could respond, Jack continued, his eyes searching hers. I know this is a lot. But seeing you again, after all this time, it feels like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. He paused, his voice softening as he added, I don't expect you to have the same feelings. But I had to say it. I couldn't leave without telling you how much you still mean to me. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her heart flutter at the sincerity in his voice. But at the same time, the weight of reality settled in. This wasn't just some fantasy. Jack's life was entangled in a complicated mess of legal battles, financial ruin, and family drama. And here she was, trying to hold her life together for Lily. For herself. I don't know what to say, Sarah whispered, looking down at her hands. She had never felt so torn. I have so many responsibilities. I have Lily to think about. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I get it, I really do. But can we at least take a moment? Just the two of us. To reconnect? To figure out what this is. Whatever this might be. Before Sarah could answer, a sudden commotion interrupted them. She turned just as a figure appeared in the distance, Victoria. Her face was twisted in anger. Her eyes fixed on Jack with a look that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The tension in the air immediately thickened. Victoria's voice rang out as she stormed toward them, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. So, this is how it is. Jack, she spat, her gaze flicking to Sarah with disdain. You've moved on so quickly. Huh? This is what you're doing now? Jack stood up, his voice firm as he faced Victoria. This is none of your business. Victoria, you need to leave. But the confrontation was far from over. The air was electric with hostility, and Sarah could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She wanted to leave, to run from the chaos. But she felt rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. The past, the present, and the future were all colliding in this single moment. And she wasn't sure what would come next. As Sarah stood there, Caught in the storm of emotions and words swirling around her, she realized that her life was no longer just about surviving the daily grind. It had become about opening herself up to possibilities. Despite the uncertainty and fear, Jack's presence reminded her of what she had been missing, of the warmth and love that she had long pushed aside in the pursuit of stability and survival. Victoria's departure, with her final words of scorn, felt like a distant echo. In that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the way Jack looked at her. The way he had stepped in to protect her from the chaos of his past. What mattered was the shared history between them, the bond they had once had. And now, perhaps, could find again. As they stood in the park, Jack took a step closer, his hand gently reaching for hers. Sarah looked at him, the weight of everything falling away. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the struggles, the worries, and the constant pressure to hold everything together. I don't know what this is going to look like, she said softly, her voice filled with both uncertainty and hope. But I'm willing to find out. Jack smiled, his eyes filled with the same warmth that had first drawn her to him all those years ago. So am I, he replied. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city, Sarah realized that sometimes, life had a way of bringing people back together when they least expected it. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for both of them to begin anew. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more life stories like this.